Hi, sweet beans. Welcome back to Wild Geese. I'm your host, Anna. Today, I want to talk about the pressure to make something original because I feel like it's something that held me back from making anything for a really long time. I felt like I don't have anything new to say, so why say anything at all? And it kind of reminds me of this TikTok that I saw recently where this woman was like, all of the girls writing on Substack are writing these vapid fluff pieces, so I just don't make anything and I judge them from afar. And she was obviously joking. But it feels like that actually is how some people move through the world, and I've had stages where I've been that person. And I've heard from a lot of people that are kind of moving through these spheres of being seen as unoriginal. And it makes sense if you think of what our society usually values and sees as productive. We live in obviously a very individualistic society that centers these stories of hero worship. And constant economic growth is seen as the number one indicator of our society's health above the ability for people to, have their basic human needs met. And I actually only feel our obsession with novelty getting stronger as generative AI gets noisier and noisier. People are constantly talking about making something surprising and unpredictable, something that AI could never make. That's how you're going to differentiate yourself from machines. So I guess I just want to dig into this thought that you need to be saying something new in order for it to be worth saying. Because I think taking the pressure off of myself to be original was the thing that allowed me to start putting myself out there and to give myself the gift of a creative life. And in creating this episode, I've really been thinking more about that dance between creating a new idea and deepening and nurturing an old one. And it's not that I think one is better than the other. They both have their time and place, but I think that new ideas are more obviously valued when it comes to validation, money, prestige, whatever. So I'd like to make the case for unoriginal ideas. And novel idea or not, I think of this Rilke quote, and it really guides me in deciding which ideas are worth digging my teeth into at any given moment. And it says this: be patient towards all that is unresolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign language. Do not now seek the answers, which cannot be given you because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then, gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. Part of me tells me I've read that quote before, so if that's a repeat, sorry, but also, no, I'm not, because we'll get to it, but the whole point of this is that repetition is okay. But I love this idea of living the questions, and one arena that I can feel myself doing this in is language learning. You become so aware and in tune with the way language shapes your understanding of the world. When you see how sentences can literally be structured differently, certain words that exist in one language don't exist in another. That's why I'm excited to talk about today's sponsor, Rosetta Stone. Rosetta Stone is an all-in-one language learning platform made for real life. With structured lessons that build real skills and true immersive learning that mirrors the way you learned your first language as a child, you can build real-life speaking confidence and use it for traveling, communicating with friends and family, or reading texts that haven't been translated from your primary language. One thing I really appreciate about Rosetta Stone is that it's not all about memorizing vocabulary. It's actually applied to real-world topics, from home and health to dining out and vacation. I'm hopefully gearing up for a trip to Paris this summer, and Rosetta Stone's True Accent speech recognition technology is helping me perfect my French pronunciation with instant feedback. Every lesson is designed to strengthen core areas like pronunciation, grammar foundations, active listening comprehension, and confident writing. Not only do I feel like I'm preparing for a trip abroad, but I also feel like I'm opening the door to a new way of understanding the world. Check out the link in my description box to get an exclusive offer on your Rosetta Stone subscription. But anyway, I wanted to start with that quote because I feel like it's been a better guiding light for me than these questions of what's the most original idea? What's the thing that's going to get me the most recognition? That's going to get me in the history books as the person that was the first person to do XYZ, whatever. I decide what I want to make by falling in love with the questions, and I'm a little bit unconcerned with how original the answer that I live my way into is. I'll talk about that more in a second, but I want to talk about what was the thing that got me thinking in the direction of this episode in the first place, and that is a TikTok by Zero Wolf. They're talking about not being afraid to do the obvious, because what's obvious to you is not obvious to other people. It's kind of like a you're numb to your own knowledge sort of thing. And they're talking about this conceptual art class that they took a while ago, and they kept making things that felt original to them, but the pieces would fall flat on review. And they said this: And trying to create something that felt original to me, I was making something that didn't fully make sense to me. And so the feedback I always got was that they kind of felt incomplete. They felt not totally realized. Because I was thinking, I want my audience to react by going, whoa, what? Which means I need to pick concepts and make these prompts go in a direction that make me go, whoa, what? But the problem is that those directions were directions I didn't really fully understand, which made it difficult to satisfyingly realize them because I was trying to interpret my own art as I was making it. And so they basically said after a couple of rounds of poor feedback, they kind of threw their hands up and they were like, all right, I'm not even going to try to make something interesting. I'm going to do the most obvious thing because I don't know what y'all want from me. And as soon as they did that, the feedback turned around and the professor and their peers were actually like, oh, that's a really interesting interpretation of the prompt, which kind of makes me think of like if you've ever been in a conversation with someone where you say something that to you feels so obvious that it's almost like dead air, where you're like, well, duh, like, of course I said that. Like, what else was there to say? And then the other person looks at you and they're like, huh, I've never thought about that before. And you can't help but be like, what do you mean you've never thought about that before? Like, that was the least interesting thing I've said in this conversation. But Zero Wolf says, and sorry, I'm saying Zero Wolf, I don't actually know what this person's name is, but that's the username. But they said, the point is not just art is a bunch of bullshit, fake it till you make it. The point is that the perspectives that are unique to you and that you are most equipped to write about or make art about or explore are perspectives that are going to feel incredibly obvious to you. And there might be a lot of ideas that you might be ignoring because to you they feel banal and obvious and juvenile, and you're chasing things that are more interesting and esoteric to you because they're unfamiliar, and that unfamiliarity means that you are not really equipped to realize them in a satisfying way for an audience. And I love the way they put this, but I do have to underline the last few words, for an audience. Like, after seeing this TikTok, I was left with some contradictory feelings because on one hand, like I said before, setting myself free from the expectation to be original is what helped me actually start making things. But on the other hand, I think it's another sort of box that you could put yourself in to say, I'm only going to make what's obvious to me because that's the thing that I am equipped to make. That's what's going to land with my audience. That's what's going to make me money, whatever. I think it's incredibly valuable to stretch yourself and make things that make you go, whoa, what? Even if they're not going to totally land with an audience. Like, that's just part of the learning process to me. And going back to what I was saying before about living the questions, I am under no impression that I am creating something new with the answers that I live my way into or the confusion that I'm like currently stewing in. But whatever I'm creating is often the container to hold the questions I'm currently asking in, or reflect on the answers I feel I've lived my way into. And that feels like more fertile ground for creation to me than thinking of my ideas as quote unquote original or unoriginal, even obvious or interesting. And obviously unoriginal and obvious have slightly different definitions, but I'm kind of using them interchangeably because I feel like when we think of making something quote unquote original, we're not actually often thinking that we are literally going to stumble upon a completely new idea that no human being has ever thought of or explored before. I think it's more that we're just afraid of being like shallow and redundant. And I really oscillate with Wild Geese specifically between making episodes that feel obvious to me and episodes that feel like a stretch. Episodes where I feel like I'm like completely in over my head, doubting my ability to make it the entire time because it's still like such a big question that I'm still stewing again in confusion over. Like Zero Wolf said, I'm interpreting my work as I'm making it, which makes it harder to create and harder to consume. But that friction is not always something I feel the need to run away from necessarily. And transparently, I prioritize my own experience in making whatever I'm making. And that may ultimately hold me back in any marketplace of ideas, but I don't think that will hold me back as a person. Like when I think of the episodes that I really used as containers to live in the questions that I am currently asking myself, those episodes do usually underperform if we're looking at vanity metrics online. But I can actually look back to the creation of those episodes and see the ways that they shaped me as a person as I was making them. Hi, day 2 of recording. I recently went home and my uncle was like, there should be a drinking game for every time that you go away and come back with different lighting or a different outfit on. But anyway, I think back to the episode, How to Be an Artist Without Selling Your Soul on the Internet. That one didn't really perform well. And I say this with grace for myself, but I don't think it was put together very well. It was kind of confusing, and I knew that while I was making it. But I remember having such an intense personal realization while I was making that episode that by the time I recorded it and put it out, I remember being like, yeah, this is not my best, but it was worth making. Like, I don't even really care how it's perceived because it was a generative process for me to make. But anyway, that's just a side tangent to say, I do believe we should be making things not just for our audience. Even if we are sharing it with an audience, I feel like it's very worth it to keep a pulse on what you need right now, and then giving yourself what you need through what you're making. So like, if you need spontaneity in your life, making something spontaneous. If you need more ease and audacity, making something obvious. If you need a challenge, making something that plops you right in the middle of your confusion. Like, deprioritize your anticipation of the audience's reactions is all I'm saying, which is easier said than done. I think it's very easy to devalue your own work based on your audience's expectations and values. Like, artists, whether it's the artist themselves or like the marketing arm behind them, often feel like they have to position what they're making as this like original, never been done before, groundbreaking thing in order to sell it, basically. Sarah Stein Lebrano's essay, Do We Need New Ideas or Better Influencers, talks about how she was giving 2 of her friends feedback on a book that they wrote. And she liked the book. She thought it was done well, but she thought that the claim they were making, that it was saying something new, was not true. So she ended up telling him the book they had written was valuable, but it was not original. And this actually really offended the authors. They were like insisting that these were new ideas. She wrote, "This all might sound like I was rather cool to my friends, but what I was telling them about their book is not an insult in my world." And her main claim of this essay, as the title suggests, is that we don't really need new ideas. We need more interesting and varied ways of expressing ideas that already exist so that they're accessible, absorbed, and understood by the public. And of course, she's like, there are exceptions to this. There are areas in which we need new ideas, but in many areas, that's not the case. So why is it that new ideas are often seen as the only thing worth exploring? And she wrote, "Why were my 2 male friends upset by my analysis? And why, more generally, are people regularly itchy around the idea that writers and thinkers should spend a lot of time communicating the same ideas to the public, teaching and strategically targeting their message, rather than trying to come up with new concepts or a turn of phrase no one has ever coined before? I think it has to do with social reproductive labor and its status in our society." So social reproductive labor is a Marxist feminist term, and it entails basically everything that a society needs to survive beyond the work that's being done in, say, like an office place or a factory building. It includes birthing and raising babies, cooking, cleaning, elder care, healthcare, education. It's often unpaid and historically has been relegated to women's work. And Lebrano's essay says this social reproductive labor is undervalued both in terms of prestige and money. The same is true of the waged economy, of course. Those who do jobs that involve social reproduction, people like teachers and nurses, are paid hardly anything at all when one considers the incredibly taxing long hours and utter devotion required. Lip service may be given to the value of these jobs, but in practice, they go undersupported and under-resourced. So Sarah specifically narrows in on intellectual social reproductive care. So these are things like teaching, writing about, and creating things around ideas that already exist. And she gives a couple of reasons why intellectual social reproductive care is devalued, outside of just saying, like, this is a side effect of patriarchy and capitalism. She says, it's not just that our culture disrespects social reproductive labor. In some curious, deep sense, we fear it, both what it does to us when we care and when we are cared for. Firstly, we fear what happens to us when we care in this way. Many of us are afraid to spend time helping others exist and grow, lest we doom ourselves to apparent obscurity and hide ourselves from the esteem of the world. And she uses professors as an example, saying that that's like really a thankless job, whereas you have researchers who get the opportunity to have their names in books and publications cited forever as a quote-unquote original thinker. I actually recently recovered my old NYU email login so that I could reach out to an old professor who made a big impact on me and just tell her how big of an impact she made. And she told me that she's been getting an influx of those messages recently, which is really lovely to hear. I think that's a great thing to do. If you have an old teacher or professor that made a big impact on your life, just tell them. But this point also reminded me of how I and a lot of my friends feel about the concept of motherhood, the fear that comes up around what it might mean for your own personhood to decenter yourself so completely to nurture another human being. Another reason Sarah gives is this. She says, we fear what happens when we are cared for in this way. Many of us fear the power of the social reproductive process of shaping the other, its hidden enormous influence, its inescapable asymmetry. There is something that is a bit corrosive, even in good care, including teaching and the shaping of intellectual sensibilities. And that is frightening, even when it is probably necessary. So this really comes down to power dynamics. Like if you think of any asymmetrical care relationship that you've had, with a teacher, a mentor, a parent, a grandparent, whatever, there were likely moments of suspicion, like, can I trust this person to guide me? And then, of course, also moments of resentment where you feel you've outgrown their care or wish you have. And this suspicion does serve a social purpose because whoever's guiding you in whatever way has the power to inform your life. They have the power to kind of derail your life or to build it up in some way. Like if you think about a young boy stumbling upon Andrew Tate and falling into the manosphere, and as a result becoming isolated and violent towards women, that's a very different outcome than if that boy had stumbled across someone who was sharing resources to help him access and express his emotions. I don't know. I'm making shit up. But when you're receiving social reproductive care from someone, you're vulnerable. And influencers essentially are engaging in social reproductive care. Sarah says, influencers are creating remarkably popular and engaging materials of social reproduction, teaching people how to care for themselves and be in a certain way. This includes how to apply makeup, parent, cook, clean things efficiently, manage relationships, and do self-care. The influencer is in many ways a stand-in for the mother, partner, and best friend that we all might need at some point, but not be able to access for whatever reason. And of course, they're not cleaning and cooking for you directly. They're giving you inspiration and information instead. They're changing your brain, whether that's in regards to your mood or your understanding of risotto, attachment styles, or late-stage capitalism. Their work is thus always social reproductive and cognitive, and sometimes intellectual. This touchingly suggests that none of us are ever really getting enough of this specific kind of instruction and care, that none of us are ever really ready to go about the business of being human. And when I read that, I was like, oh, that makes me feel a little better about sometimes carrying that label of influencer. Like that sounds like a worthy thing to do, but at its base, that's really a morally neutral thing. Okay, and then the last quote that I'm going to pull from this essay, can you tell that I loved this essay? I've just been quoting it so much, says, to write for the public, hoping they will take up thinking differently, is, oddly, to align yourself with the mother and the nagging girlfriend or wife, with the influencer, with the teacher, with all those giving instructive care. I am asserting this point about gender descriptively and not prescriptively, of course. The gendering involved in nearly all social reproductive is alarming and should be. Notice how the masculine option of writing quote-unquote new ideas is seen as both objective and more impressive, while the social reproductive female labor is seen as potentially dangerous, even as many of its most difficult aspects are both necessary and inescapable. And the interesting thing about social reproductive work as an influencer is that I don't actually think it's economically undervalued in the same way as like a teacher would be. But I think people have a heightened level of suspicion towards influencers, and rightfully so, because of the way that we're making money. People are rightfully suspicious that someone's going to sell out. And I think these legitimate fears can often flatten the landscape of social reproductive work that's happening online to blanket statements like influencers are unoriginal, vapid, and shallow, which I think makes it harder and harder for people to accept what they have to give and start putting themselves out there because they're anticipating that kind of reception. Like, I can't even tell you how many times I've had conversations with people that want to share their work, and they immediately follow up any discussions of those desires with, but I don't want to be an influencer. And my point is not like, okay, everyone go become an influencer. Everyone needs to put their work online in order for it to be real. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying there are a lot of people who are making things and never sharing them because they feel it's been done before. And they don't want to be seen by the people in their lives or strangers online as this like unoriginal hack that's just trying to make money or become famous. And look, I've made a lot of things that I won't share. I think there are a lot of artists in the world that will never share what they make, and that doesn't make them less of an artist. But I think that if you're feeling the impulse, like if you're feeling the desire to share what you're making and you're stopping yourself, that's worth interrogating. Like, I stopped myself from putting myself out there for so long because it felt like the internet was already inundated with every opinion that will ever exist. Everything had already been made. Like, there was no gap for me to fill. And at some point I had to realize that it's not my job to find some big gaping hole in some big conversation before I can give myself permission to create something and share it. It's my job to access wonder about what already exists right in front of me and then be loud about it. Okay, I have to add that I went to a Depths of Wikipedia event last night, which is this woman, Annie Rauerda, who has made an entire platform on just like deep dives on Wikipedia. And it just gave me a newfound appreciation for that platform and all of the editors on it. During one part, she was making the point that Wikipedia is this human-made and sustained platform where it's not a lot of like new ideas, but old ideas take so much maintenance every single day. And people are just editing Wikipedia for the love of the game, putting in an unbelievable amount of care. It's actually incredibly touching, and it's largely unpaid, unsung labor. And I just wanted to point that out because I feel like in talking about this, we can think like, oh, okay, I want to make something about what I care about, so let's blow it up into this huge project. But like, it really could just be editing on Wikipedia, and that could give you that like burst of, I've done something for the ideas that I care about today, and that makes me feel good. I think it's really lovely and touching how many people exist out there that just want to contribute to collective knowledge. So go check out Annie's work. I just wanted to include this because I was kind of like, damn, this is so tied in with the episode for this week. I can't not talk about it. All right, back to the main point, I guess. I've seen so many people in my years of working behind the scenes on other people's podcasts who talked themselves out of good ideas because someone else was already doing it. And this might sound super cliche, but like the way that someone else does it is never going to be exactly the same as the way you will do it. Like, I had a friend start a podcast a few months ago, and she reached out to me beforehand and said, I don't want you to feel like I'm copying you. And I was like, girl, what? Our ideas are not private property. Like, yes, there is such a thing as intellectual property, and we've got to be careful about that. But like, cite your sources. It's that simple. But ideas don't just come out of your ass and you can set yourself free from that expectation. Like, if your friend starts a crochet business and that inspires you to start a crochet business, you can collaborate. You don't have to then go fight about who invented crochet businesses. If someone sat you and I down in a room together and gave us all the same sources of information and said, make something from this, we would make two entirely different things. And I'm going to read a quote from The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis. And he says, you may have noticed that the books you really love are bound together by a secret thread. You know very well what is the common quality that makes you love them, though you cannot put it into words. But most of your friends do not see it at all, and often wonder why, liking this, you should also like that. You have stood before some landscape, which seems to embody what you have been looking for all your life, and then turned to the friend at your side who appears to be seeing what you saw. But at the first words, a gulf yawns between you, and you realize that this landscape means something totally different to him. That he is pursuing an alien vision and cares nothing for the ineffable suggestion by which you are transported. Even in your hobbies, has there not always been some secret attraction which the others are curiously ignorant of, something not to be identified with, but always on the verge of breaking through, the smell of cut wood in the workshop, or the clap-clap of water against the boat's side? Are not all lifelong friendships born at the moment when at last you meet another human being who has some inkling, but faint and uncertain even in the best, of that something which you were born desiring, and which, beneath the flux of other desires, and in all the momentary silences between the louder passions, night and day, year by year, from childhood to old age, you are looking for, watching for, listening for? It is the secret signature of each soul, the incommunicable and unappeasable want, the thing we desired before we met our wives and made our friends or chose our work, and which we shall still desire on our deathbeds, when the mind no longer knows wife or friend or work. While we are, this is. If we lose this, we lose all. And I like this quote because I think it gets to that fact that, like, the thing about you that is original is the fact that you are alive right now as the person that you are. No one else will ever have the experience that you're having. I don't need you to invent something new in order to care, to hear what's happening for you, to see what you make of it. I also think, to be a little nonlinear here, going way back in the conversation about sharing something obvious, a fear that can come up for people about sharing the obvious is that the feedback from other people will be, well, everyone already knows this. Why would you share this? Like, you're just adding to the noise. But I think that's such silly feedback. And I think people that say that kind of thing are weird for that because they're assuming that everyone knows the exact same things as everyone else, which is just not true. I can assure you that there are so many things you know that I do not know, and vice versa. And if something is interesting to you, there are a lot more people out there who find it interesting too. And if you're having trouble catching what's interesting to you, like pinpointing it, you probably need to be taking more notes. If you're an OG, you know I'm all about digital gardening, taking notes while I'm consuming media so that my thoughts are part of the conversation while I'm engaging with other people's ideas. And Notability, which is the app I use for handwritten notes on my iPad, gave me a 25% off discount code, so I'll have that in the episode description. Sometimes I also use it for fun little doodles on the graph paper. But yeah, highly recommend taking notes while you're consuming media so that you understand what you're thinking, feeling, and noticing instead of like waiting until other people on the internet tell you what you should be thinking, feeling, and noticing. And I think there's a part of this conversation that reminds me of what happens when you are loved by someone else in a way that kind of allows you to bloom. Like when someone accepts you completely and you feel yourself changing in the midst of that, or when you accept someone else completely and you see them changing as a result. Henrik Carlson has an essay titled, "When I Accept Myself Just As I Am, I Change." And I found this to be true for me personally and in my relationships. Like when I've found myself in relationships where there's an underlying rejection of the other, we've both kind of spiraled more deeply and stubbornly into these fixed states. Versus the relationships where we've both totally accepted each other, there's been a freedom to change. And I think the same can be said for your ideas. Like when you have an idea and you're immediately judging it as obvious, unoriginal, frivolous, vapid, whatever, it shrinks. It doesn't have any room to take that little seed of obvious inspiration and bloom out into something that might surprise you. And I remember last year, I have this little piece that I wrote after a day at the zoo with my boyfriend, and he was talking to me about how batteries work. And I thought it was so endearing because I've never thought to wonder about how batteries work. But of course, the fact that we have people that do wonder how batteries work is why we have that kind of insane technology. My curiosity just doesn't naturally bend that way. So I've never spent a whole night sitting down and watching YouTube videos about how batteries work. But I loved hearing him talk about it because it's him I'm interested in, and it's him who can take the most boring topic in the world and make it interesting. And I wrote, "Much of life is so boring, but you are fun, even when you are boring." And I think it sounds counterintuitive to the way that we talk about art. Like one of the last things that you would want anyone to say about something that you make is that it's boring. But I kind of think we have to love our ideas and accept them and give them space to be what they are in the same way that we would extend that energy out to other people that we love. And this isn't even really me trying to say like, oh, there are people who will love what you love no matter what because they love you, which, yes, that's true. But I think it's more about giving yourself space to wonder about things and accept ideas that may, to you, seem unoriginal or obvious, approaching those ideas with the same level of openness that you would when a person you love is telling you about something that they love. I saw this thing, I can't remember if it was like a Tumblr text post or a tweet or what, but it said, "You hate your art because it looks like you made it." And I think facing that and moving through that and continuing to make stuff and share stuff anyway without any proof of concept or general consensus that what you're making is any good is like one of the biggest gifts that you can give yourself through making shit. I don't have to make something original or groundbreaking in order to make something that I love. I don't have to be interesting to everyone in order to be interesting to myself. And I think that's all I have for you today. Kind of a short episode this week, but I've had fun making it. And I'll talk to you in 2 weeks. Okay, bye.